The cabin lights dimmed to their pre-flight glow, and a low hum of conversation filled Horizon Flight 512's first-class section. Plush leather seats gleamed under the soft overhead lamps. On one side, a distinguished businessman unfolded his newspaper. On the other, an elderly couple exchanged whispered hellos. Everyone seemed at ease, until the peace shattered in an instant. "You don't belong here!" The words cut through the cabin like a thunderclap. All eyes snapped toward the source, a middle-aged flight attendant in perfectly pressed Navy slacks and a name tag reading Rebecca Grant. Her arm shot out, finger pointed squarely at Kiara Davis, who sat frozen in seat 2A by the window. For one breathless moment, the world tilted on its axis. Kiara's heart slammed against her ribcage. She sat bolt upright, her hand inching toward the small recorder she'd hidden in the pocket of her carry-on. Her finger hovered over the record button, trembling. The overhead screen blinked the flight number and route, Atlanta to London. But Kiara hardly registered it. She only saw Rebecca's tight lips and hard eyes, saw the silent judgment shimmering across the cabin. Rebecca took a sharp breath and repeated, louder this time, "I said, you don't belong in first class." A hush fell. The low murmur of passengers ceased. Even the guy in 2C, engrossed in his tablet, looked up. The flight attendant's voice echoed against the cabin walls, as though she meant to awaken every soul on board. Kiara swallowed hard, her throat dry. The portfolio of crisp interview notes and neatly stacked Oxford application materials lay on her lap like a fragile promise. "Is there a problem, miss?" she managed, her voice catching on the word miss. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. She stepped forward, the polished floor reflecting the flicker of her scowl. "Yes, there's a problem. Your ticket says first class, but that doesn't mean you fit the part." She glanced around as if expecting nods of agreement, but found only stunned faces. A bead of sweat trickled down Kiara's temple. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, their expressions a blend of pity and disbelief. The elderly woman across the aisle peeked over her reading glasses. A few rows back, a man cleared his throat, clutching his briefcase. No one moved to stop Rebecca. No one except Kiara, whose eyes burned with a mix of humiliation and anger. She closed her hand around the recorder's switch. Click. Instantly, Rebecca's words were etched in digital proof. The flight attendant's next move was merciless. She reached down and knocked over Kiara's water glass, sending ice and droplets cascading across the Navy portfolio. Papers fluttered like wounded birds. Kiara's meticulously prepared transcripts and notes soaked instantly, curling at the edges. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Rebecca said with a practiced tilt of her head. So fake, Kiara could almost taste the bitterness. She produced a handful of flimsy cocktail napkins. "Here, clean this up." Kiara knelt to gather her ruined documents while the passenger next to her shifted away. The man muttered to his wife, something about unbelievable behavior, and the cabin tensed as though waiting for Rebecca's next act of cruelty. Kiara's fingers fumbled through the soggy pages, her vision blurred, not from tears but from rage simmering just beneath her skin. A flash of metal caught her eye, the business-class bulkhead's mirrored accent. She pressed her palm to her chest, inhaling sharply. This wasn't just about a spilled drink. This was about a teenage girl, alone and trembling, being publicly humiliated for daring to sit where she belonged. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but she didn't shout back. She kept her chin high, her movements deliberate as she collected what remained of her portfolio. The recorder's red light winked at her, tiny, powerful. From the corner of her eye, Kiara saw a hand gesture from a woman in row 1C. Mrs. Margaret Thompson, a silver-haired former lieutenant governor of Georgia, leaned forward. Her lips moved silently. "I've got your back." Without breaking her composure, Mrs. Thompson offered Kiara a discreet nod as though they shared a secret pact. Rebecca cleared her throat and smoothed her uniform. "I'll be around to offer you alternative refreshments once we're airborne," she said, voice laced with over-politeness. "I trust you'll keep your seatbelt fastened until then." "Thank you," Kiara whispered, not looking up. She sank back into her seat, clutching her recorder beneath her thigh. She felt every stare, some curious, some sympathetic, a few even ashamed. But mostly, she felt the heat of injustice burning in her chest. The cabin fell silent again as Rebecca returned to her post at the front. The engines rumbled to life, a mechanical growl vibrating through the floor. The seatbelt sign pinged on, and passengers clicked their buckles into place. Kiara's gaze lingered on the overhead bins as if they contained more than just luggage. Maybe they held the answers to why hatred could feel so banal. Her fingers drummed on her portfolio, damp but intact enough to read. The recorder lay warm against her leg. Her grip tightened. Whatever happened next, she would have proof. The world would hear what Rebecca Grant chose to shout at her, and this recording, she vowed, would be more than a souvenir of shame. It would be the spark of change. Outside, the tarmac lights blurred as the plane pushed back from the gate. Worry and anticipation flared in Kiara's chest. She lifted her chin, set her shoulders, and prepared for the journey, not just to London, but into a fight she never asked for. But she would face it head on, one quiet click at a time. Because sometimes, a single voice can turn a cabin full of judgment into an echo of accountability. And she was ready to speak up. The cabin fell into a heavy, expectant quiet. Overhead bins clicked shut. A faint whoosh of air circulated through the vents above, but nothing broke the stillness except the soft hum of the engines powering Horizon Flight 512 down the taxiway. Kiara Davis sat rooted in her seat, heart pounding in her ears. All around her, first-class passengers exchanged glances, some furtive, some unmistakably curious. From the corner of her eye, Kiara noticed the overhead monitor flicker, looping the safety demonstration one more time. "Ladies and gentlemen," the flight attendant's recorded voice intoned, "please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened." The words felt abstract to Kiara now. They bounced off the walls and echoed around the cabin, morphing into a haunting question that seemed to belong to everyone but herself. Why is she so angry? The question lingered in the air, as thick and heavy as the smooth leather lining Kiara's seat. She swallowed, trying to steady her breathing. Her winged eyeliner smudged slightly as moisture threatened the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let the tears fall. She glanced around, first at the elderly couple settling into their cushions, then at the suited businessman scrolling news on his tablet. They all looked perfectly calm, encapsulated in their own routines, as though none of this had anything to do with them. But it did. Every pair of eyes in the cabin bore witness to her humiliation. Every whispered exchange between passengers built tension higher than any thunderstorm the plane might encounter. The silence was punctuated only by the faint rustle of newspapers, the click of seatbelt buckles, and that abiding hum that marked forward motion. Behind her, the lavatory door swung shut with a soft thud. She wondered if any of the passengers who had risen to change seats were now filing back in, disappointed to find no vacant chair. She could almost hear their thoughts. Is she really disruptive? Did she deserve to be yelled at like that? The pain of public scrutiny was a fresh wound, throbbing with every judgmental stare. Kiara leaned back, pressing her palms flat against the soggy portfolio in her lap. She could feel the dampness under her fingers, her painstakingly organized transcripts, her neatly highlighted rehearsal notes for Oxford's interview questions. They were symbols of her hard work, her dreams. Now, they were warped and water-stained evidence of something much more elemental. Cruelty. She exhaled slowly, willing herself to think clearly. Her mind replayed Rebecca Grant's harsh accusation. "You don't belong here." Why? What had she done wrong? She hadn't asked for anything more than a glass of water. She hadn't made a scene. She had only shown up with the right ticket and the ambition to change her world. Kiara's gaze shifted to the recorder tucked beneath her thigh. The red light blinked steadily, reminding her that every word Rebecca had uttered was there, indelibly captured. The power of that small device felt immense in her hand. In one corner of her mind, a voice whispered, "This is more than proof. This is your chance." At that thought, her shoulders straightened just a fraction. She tucked a stray curl behind her ear and lifted her chin. She wasn't the one who should be embarrassed. Rebecca was. Rebecca was the one acting unprofessionally, abusing her authority. Kiara's pulse throbbed with a mix of anxiety and determination. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the crew prepared for takeoff. The rhythmic thump of the wheels breached the hush, and passengers braced themselves, leaning back into their seats. Kiara mirrored them, letting the plane's motion stabilize her jittery nerves. She closed her eyes for a moment, picturing her mother's composed face. Senator Evelyn Davis, the woman who had spent decades fighting injustices in courtrooms and legislative chambers. If anyone knew what to do, it was her. "Is she okay?" a gentle voice whispered from the aisle. Kiara opened her eyes to see Mrs. Margaret Thompson leaning over. The former lieutenant governor's silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and her voice carried both warmth and authority. "That flight attendant crossed a line," Mrs. Thompson said quietly. "Don't let her shame you." Kiara managed a small nod, her throat tight. She offered a shaky smile. "Thank you," she whispered back, voice soft but sincere. Mrs. Thompson slipped back to her seat, giving Kiara a discreet thumbs up before returning to her novel. A subtle shift rippled through the cabin as other passengers exchanged understanding glances. The sudden solidarity felt like a light breeze breaking a sweltering stillness. Kiara drew in a breath, feeling the first flicker of courage. Maybe she wasn't alone after all. The plane accelerated, and a gentle vibration coursed through the cabin. Kiara's heart pounded again, but this time with hope mingling with fear. The seatbelt sign pinged overhead, and Rebecca Grant's clipped voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be wheels up in just a few moments. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Kiara pressed a fingertip to the recorder. The instrument felt like a lifeline, turning her silence into a statement. Inside, she whispered, "Be strong." As the runway lights blurred beneath them, Kiara's mind raced through the unspoken questions. Would the recording be enough to hold Rebecca accountable? Would her mother be able to intervene? And most of all, could a single teen's voice ignite change in a cabin full of strangers? The plane lifted, the city lights of Atlanta receding beneath a curtain of night. Kiara clenched the recorder tighter, determination flaring in her chest. The next chapter of her fight was just beginning, and though uncertainty surged like turbulence, she was ready to face it head-on. Because sometimes, the loudest question is asked in the quietest moments, and the answer lies in what you choose to do next. 1 hour before the drama in first class, Kiara Davis was buzzing with excitement, her heart full of possibility as she navigated the bustling concourse of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. She'd spent the last 6 months saving every spare dollar from her 3 part-time jobs, shelving books at the local library, tutoring middle school students in math, and waiting tables at a southern barbecue joint. Every shift, every late-night study session had carried her one step closer to this moment. A first-class ticket to London for an in-person interview at Oxford University. Kiara paused under the bright terminal lights to catch her reflection in a polished glass wall. 17 years old, honor student, community organizer. Her dark curls were pulled back into a neat ponytail, and she wore a crisp white blouse under a navy blazer that made her look both professional and poised. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, imbibing the low hum of rolling suitcases, announcements over the loudspeaker, and distant laughter of families reuniting. It felt surreal. Her phone buzzed, and her mother's name, Senator Evelyn Davis, flashed on the screen. Kiara tucked it away, not wanting to break stride. She was already running late. The security line snaked around the concourse, but she moved swiftly, backpack snug on her shoulders, portfolio case swinging at her side. Inside that case were her academic transcripts, letters of recommendation, her meticulously prepared talking points about her food desert initiative in Southside Atlanta. Each document symbolized years of dedication. At the security checkpoint, Kiara handed over her driver's permit and ticket with practiced calm. The TSA agent glanced at her passport and then at the boarding pass, skimmed it once more, then handed them back with a friendly smile. "First class to London, right? Must be something special going on," he said. "Oh, I'm interviewing at Oxford," Kiara replied softly, her cheeks warming. "Second applicant from my county to make it this far." The agent's smile widened. "Congratulations. Enjoy the flight, and good luck with the interview." "Thank you," she said, and the words felt like an affirmation, a nod to every hour she'd spent studying after school. As she gathered her things and slipped through the metal detector, Kiara's chest swelled with a mixture of pride and nerves. Oxford was the dream, a chance to build on her passion for social justice, to learn from scholars at one of the world's oldest universities. Beyond security, she found a quiet corner near Gate A23 and set down her bags. She removed the boarding pass to double-check the flight number, Flight 512, Atlanta to London, departing at 7:15 p.m., and pulled out her phone. A quick text to her best friend Maya sent, "Can you believe this? First class, Oxford interview, Mom's the best!" Before Maya could reply, Kiara heard the flutter of heels behind her. "Kiara?" The warm, familiar voice of her mother made her turn. Evelyn Davis stood there in a tailored charcoal suit, her Senate pin glinting in the fluorescent lights. Silver-brown hair framing a face etched with years of public service and quiet strength. She held out an envelope. "Open it," Evelyn said, tone soft but decisive. Kiara tore it open to reveal a printed first-class boarding pass, upgraded with her mother's airline miles. Single. One way. Seat 2A. She looked up, stunned. "Mom, you didn't have to do this," Kiara whispered, voice thick. Her mother smiled, the kind of smile that spoke of late nights in Washington, negotiations in dusty hearing rooms, and unwavering faith in her daughter. "You earned it. You've worked too hard to pay for something as mundane as Seat 17B in economy. This interview matters, Z. Show them what you're made of." Kiara stood on tiptoe, embraced her mother. "Thank you," she breathed. "I won't let you down." "You never do," Evelyn said, eyes shining with pride. "Now let's get you to the lounge. I've got a quick call with a Senate colleague, but I'll see you before takeoff." With a proud wave, Evelyn melted into the crowd. Kiara watched her go, the warmth in her chest spreading until it tingled in her fingertips. The boarding gate lounge was calm, soft jazz piping through overhead speakers, cocktails being poured, buffet trays arranged with smoked salmon and fresh fruit. She swiped her boarding pass at the lounge entrance and stepped into a quiet oasis away from the terminal rush. She sank into a leather chair, set her portfolio beside her, and allowed herself a moment to breathe. She sipped a chilled bottle of water and let the tangy sweetness soothe her nerves. In the corner of the lounge, a barista prepared cold brew coffee, and a bar cart gleamed with sparkling aluminum flutes. Kiara's mind flicked back to all the face-to-face practice interviews she'd done with her debate coach, the mock Q&A sessions with her AP biology teacher, the nights she'd stayed up memorizing every nuance of British pronunciation. A soft voice called her name. It was Senator Davis, approaching purposefully. She handed Kiara a small gift bag. Inside, an engraved pen and a set of handwritten notes, words of encouragement, key facts about Oxford's curriculum, and reminders. You belong, you earned it, use your voice. Kiara's throat tightened. She lifted the pen, ran her thumb over the smooth barrel, and nodded. "I will," she said, eyes bright. "Boarding in 10, her mother said, checking her watch. "Be yourself, speak from the heart, and remember that even if things go sideways, I've got your back." Kiara zipped up her portfolio and gathered her belongings. She slipped the engraved pen into her blazer pocket. As she stood, she felt a surge of confidence. This was where she was meant to be. The flight at first felt like a privilege, a reward for hard work, and the interview like the next step in her life's journey. She felt the energy shift in her, anticipation blending with determination. The grand leather wingback chairs of the lounge seemed to whisper promises. You've earned this. Now take it." With a final hug and a quick selfie to capture the moment, Kiara walked toward the boarding gate. Through the glass doors, she could see Flight 512's sleek fuselage waiting on the tarmac, a testament to both ambition and possibility. She inhaled deeply, squared her shoulders, and stepped aboard. Just moments before Rebecca Grant's cruel words would shatter the calm, Kiara Davis felt unstoppable. Driven by dreams of intellectual discovery, armed with her mother's unwavering support, and ready to claim her place among the storied halls of Oxford. The world was hers to conquer, or so she thought. Kiara settled into seat 2A, her portfolio balanced carefully on her lap, and allowed herself a slow exhale. The cabin was quiet now, the boarding bridge disconnected, and the hush of anticipation settled around the first-class cabin like a soft blanket. She glanced at the window to see the runway lights drifting past as the captain taxied the plane out toward the active strip. Just as she began to organize her interview notes, a crisp voice cut through the stillness. "Excuse me, miss." Kiara looked up to see Rebecca Grant, the same flight attendant who'd snapped at her earlier. Rebecca's perfectly pressed uniform and prim hairstyle stood in stark contrast to the carefree energy Kiara had felt moments ago in the lounge. Her tone was clipped, not angry this time, but coldly professional. "Boarding pass, please," Rebecca said, leaning forward just enough to block Kiara's view of the aisle. She extended a waiting hand and peered at the magnetic strip as though it might hide some secret. Kiara handed it over, heart thudding. Rebecca held the pass against the overhead lights, flipped it to inspect the back, and then tapped her fingernail on the barcode scanner even though it was already activated. "Interesting," Rebecca murmured, voice low. Kiara's stomach clenched. She tried to meet Rebecca's eyes, but the attendant continued her slow, meticulous examination as though mocking her before any words were exchanged. The other flight attendants moved past them, attending to other passengers without a second glance. Only Kiara received this level of scrutiny. Finally, Rebecca handed the pass back. "You're in 2A, she said flatly, sliding it across the polished armrest. "Follow company policy at all times, understand?" Kiara managed a polite, "Yes, ma'am," though her pulse had quickened. She could have asked what policy needed clarification, but she knew the moment she opened her mouth, she'd give Rebecca another excuse to torment her. Instead, she turned back to her portfolio and pretended to focus on her notes. Moments later, as a fellow passenger reached for a glass of water, Kiara tapped her call button. She waited, eyes fixed straight ahead. Rebecca appeared, hovering at her shoulder with that same rigid posture. Kiara forced herself to speak evenly. "May I have some water, please?" Rebecca's lips curved into a thin smile. "I'll be back," she said, before deliberately walking past Kiara to attend to another seat, one directly across the aisle occupied by a middle-aged white businessman. That passenger offered a grateful nod when she poured him water, but Kiara's request went unanswered. Kiara closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. Her fingers itched to pick up the phone recorder tucked under her thigh, but she resisted. She couldn't let the recording device draw attention. It was her secret weapon for later. Instead, she let her hands settle in her lap, holding the soggy edge of her portfolio as a reminder of why she was here, to fight for her future, not to wage a confrontational battle with a flight attendant. A low murmur of voices drifted down the aisle as Rebecca returned with 2 napkins. She dropped them on Kiara's tray table from a distance, as though handling something contaminated. "Use those," she said brusquely, then spun on her heel and disappeared back toward the front. Kiara pressed the napkins against her notes, blotting them gently. The thin cocktail napkins did little good, and some ink ran, smudging her neatly printed questions about Victorian-era policy and community-based food programs. Her chest tightened with frustration. This wasn't an accident. Every slight was intentional, and the pattern was clear. She glanced at the passenger in 2B, who was chatting amiably with Rebecca as the attendant pointed out the in-seat entertainment controls. Then at the older couple across the aisle, receiving warm smiles and genuine concern. Finally, back to her own seat, where Rebecca's indifference loomed like a shadow. Kiara's mind raced through the possible reasons. Was it her race? Her youth? The fact that she was traveling alone? Maybe all of the above. But none of it mattered. She had a right to be here. Her first-class ticket was valid. Her mother was a U.S. senator. And most importantly, she had the ambition and the credentials to earn her place. As the seatbelt sign pinged on, Kiara tucked away her portfolio and belted herself in. Rebecca's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We'll be airborne shortly." Her tone perfectly neutral. Nothing like the cold disdain Kiara felt when she looked Rebecca's way. Kiara kept her gaze forward, feeling the plane's engine spool up behind her. In that moment, she saw the cabin not as a collection of seats, but as a stage. And on that stage, Rebecca was directing a performance of exclusion. But Kiara would not be a passive extra in Rebecca's show. She was the protagonist of her own story. Her mind flicked to the lines she'd practiced in mock interviews. "Adversity sharpens my convictions. My community service taught me resilience." She forced a tight smile, as though reassuring herself. Then she took out her phone and typed a quick note in the locked app she used to send encrypted messages to her mother. "They're ignoring my requests. Details to follow." There was no immediate reply, but Kiara felt a flicker of comfort knowing her message was on its way. She slid the phone back into her pocket, placed her hands on her wet portfolio, and steeled herself for the climb into the real conflict she knew was coming. Because this wasn't going to be a one-off incident. This was the first ripple of a storm that would test every ounce of her composure and demand that she turn her silence into something more powerful than words alone. Ahead of them, the runway lights faded as the plane climbed into the dusky sky. Kiara pressed her palms into the armrests and prepared herself for the turbulence of injustice. She would meet it head-on, and when the time was right, she would have the proof to make the cabin and the world listen. Kiara Davis sat rigidly in seat 2A as the flight attendants began moving through the cabin with meal trays in hand. The cabin lights glowed soft gold, and the murmur of conversation buzzed like electricity as passengers prepared for dinner at 35,000 feet. Kiara's stomach knotted. She hadn't eaten since the lounge. She pressed her call button, determined to salvage whatever dignity remained. Rebecca Grant reappeared almost immediately, clipboard in hand. Kiara forced a polite smile. "May I order from the menu, please?" Rebecca's lips curved into a tight smirk. She flipped through her notes before responding, "We've actually run out of first-class meals tonight." Kiara's heart lurched. "All of them?" Rebecca nodded curtly. "Completely out. I can bring you something from economy if you'd like." She turned away, as though she'd offered the world. Kiara swallowed hard. "Economy is fine," she said quietly, hoping to keep her voice steady. Rebecca clicked her tongue and walked off, carrying her indifference like a badge of honor. Kiara watched her deliver a perfectly plated salmon entree to the businessman next door, as though nothing had happened. The suspended animation in the cabin, cutlery clinking against china, polite laughter, felt cruelly at odds with the humiliation unfolding in seat 2A. She unfolded her damp, blotchy portfolio, trying to keep track of her thoughts. The Oxford interview questions scrawled on her notes blurred where ink had run. She folded her hands tightly in her lap, collecting herself. She pressed her thumb against the recorder hidden in her pocket, reminding herself she had proof of every slight. Suddenly, the serene hum of the cabin shattered. A sharp voice crackled over the PA. "Attention, first-class passengers. An important reminder. First-class seating is reserved for ticketed first-class travelers only. Companions or non-ticketed passengers must return to their assigned seats in economy immediately. Thank you for your cooperation." Rebecca's voice, amplified through the speaker, cut through the air like a razor. The entire cabin fell silent. Plates hovered halfway to mouths. Eyes darted around trying to locate the source of the announcement. A few passengers glanced in Kiara's direction. Confusion etched on their faces. Rebecca reappeared from the galley, delivering trays of sparkling water to other first-class passengers, with the same polite detachment she'd shown Kiara. Thomas Reed hovered at the front, arms crossed, scanning the cabin for any sign of disruption. Neither of them looked directly at Kiara, but she knew their eyes tracked her every move. She squared her shoulders and turned her gaze to the window, letting the flashing runway lights blur into streaks of silver rain. Instead of answering Rebecca's slight or pleading for help, Kiara chose silence. No angry words, no tears. She kept her lips pressed together, giving nothing away. But her eyes, dark pools of controlled defiance, burned with intent. Subtly, she pressed her thumb against the recorder tucked in her pocket, ensuring it was still capturing every unfair word and gesture. Then she raised her chin an inch, sending a clear, unspoken message. She was not broken. Passengers a few rows away noticed her stillness. The elderly couple across the aisle, previously murmuring over salmon and champagne, sat straighter as they watched Kiara's silent display. A young woman in row 3B exchanged a look of sympathy with her partner, then reached discreetly for her own phone, ready to record if things escalated. Even the stolid businessman who'd earlier nodded in agreement now watched Kiara's calm resolve with a hint of admiration. The intercom crackled again as the captain's voice returned. "We appreciate your patience, folks. We're expecting a patch of mild turbulence shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The routine announcement sounded almost surreal after the earlier drama. Kiara drew one deep breath, letting it out slowly. She felt the plane shudder, a reminder that in this aircraft, as in life, turbulence comes without warning, and you learn to stay steady. Inside her mind, Kiara replayed every slight from Rebecca and Thomas. Yet she refused to be baited into confrontation. Instead, she closed her eyes for a fraction of a second and pictured her mother's calm strength. Senator Evelyn Davis, who'd faced down far more powerful opponents in Capitol Committee hearings. Kiara let that image anchor her. No matter how ruthless Rebecca's tactics, no matter how silent the cabin grew around her, she would meet cruelty with composure. Underneath her seat, her hand brushed against the recorder's smooth casing. With a single smooth motion, she withdrew it and tucked it into her blazer pocket, far more visible now to anyone paying attention. A gentle signal to observers that she wasn't alone. She then opened the encrypted messaging app on her phone, typed a brief note. "They're isolating me again, details filmed, ready for next move," and hit send. In that instant, her silence transformed into coordinated action. As the plane dipped into clouds and lights below twinkled out, Kiara fixed her gaze on the illuminated button above her seat. The recorder flashed faintly, capturing the soft click of her determinate breathing. She hadn't said a word, yet her presence spoke volumes. Somewhere in that cushioned cabin, seeds of doubt had been sown in the minds of those who'd witnessed her restraint. And in every silent signal she sent, Kiara was gathering allies, one quiet act of courage at a time. The cabin lights had been dimmed for movie service, but the tension in first class was sharper than any film could project. Kiara Davis sat in 2A, heart pounding as she pressed her recorder firmly against her thigh. Every slight glance from Rebecca Grant, every clipped instruction from Thomas Reed was being cataloged in digital proof. But beneath the flicker of the screen, Kiara felt a flicker of exhaustion settle in her bones. She'd weathered hostility, humiliation, and icy indifference, but she needed more than resolve. She needed a sign that someone else saw it too. Ahead, the in-flight entertainment screens came to life. Passengers selected movies, reached for cocktails, chatted with neighbors. The cabin hummed with polite chatter, but around Kiara, undercurrents ran deep. Each smile seemed tinged with awkwardness. Each polite, "Excuse me," carried an unspoken question. Is it really her fault? Rebecca Grant re-emerged from the galley, tray in hand, carrying a simple plastic cup of water. She deposited it at seat 2C for a white-haired gentleman, and then, without breaking her stride, stopped at Kiara's row. Kiara set her jaw, stared straight ahead. She would not rise to bait. Rebecca leaned in close, tray poised. "You'll need to keep your recorder off in first class," she said softly, voice low enough that only Kiara could hear. "You're making people uncomfortable." Kiara's pulse thundered. The recorder lay hidden beneath her sweater, but she still felt its reassuring weight. She pressed a finger to her lips in a silent gesture. Not yet. She didn't respond, didn't even blink. Rebecca's lips thinned, and she moved on, leaving Kiara shaky but undefeated. As the flight smoothed out through gentle turbulence, Kiara realized she'd run out of water. She considered pressing the call button again, but paused, watching Rebecca serve the row across the aisle with genuine warmth and hospitality. The contrast was stinging. How could one attendant be so caring to some and so callous to others? Then, from 2 rows behind her, a soft but firm voice cracked the veneer of calm. "Excuse me." Every head snapped around. Mrs. Margaret Thompson stood in the aisle, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her tailored emerald cardigan draped over a crisp blouse. She carried a leather-bound journal in one hand and a pair of reading glasses in the other. She looked at Rebecca Grant with a mix of disappointment and steel-willed authority. "Excuse me," she repeated, voice louder now. "I'm sure first-class service comes with many perks, but publicly humiliating a young woman over a minor misunderstanding is not one of them." Rebecca's eyes flicked toward her, surprise and annoyance mingling on her face. A hush swept through the cabin quicker than any intercom announcement. Kiara's breath caught. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. Margaret Thompson placed the journal gently on the neighboring empty seat, taking a deliberate step closer to Kiara's row. "Young lady," she said, turning her gaze to Kiara, "you may not know me, but I know exactly who you are. You are Kiara Davis, daughter of Senator Evelyn Davis." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Rebecca's mouth opened slightly, as though she'd inhaled cold air. The distance between Kiara and Rebecca crackled with electricity. Kiara's mind reeled. How does she know? Her mother's position at the Department of Justice was no secret, but staining their fight with humiliation at 35,000 feet had been a private cruelty. Yet here was Mrs. Thompson, delivering a counterstrike so swift it felt like lightning. "I'm Margaret Thompson," the woman proclaimed, voice rich with authority. "Former Lieutenant Governor of Georgia. I flew in to speak with you, Kiara, because I've watched your career, your activism in Atlanta's food deserts. I wanted to see for myself the young woman they call Florida's rising star." Rebecca's tray clattered as she stepped back. Thomas Reed moved forward, arms crossed, but his eyes betrayed him, uncertainty and a tinge of fear. Margaret continued, addressing Rebecca directly. "Flight attendants are entrusted to provide care and comfort to all passengers, not just the ones they deem regular customers. Your actions toward Ms. Davis violate the very code of professionalism Horizon Airlines claims to uphold." She turned to the other passengers, raising her voice just enough to draw every ear. "If any of you witnessed what happened earlier, when Ms. Davis's portfolio was drenched in water and her meal denied, then you know exactly why I'm speaking up now." A ripple of murmurs confirmed the audience was listening. The elderly gentleman who had received free water leaned forward, clearing his throat. "It was shocking. I thought perhaps there was some mix-up, but I saw everything." A young couple 2 rows back nodded in agreement. A middle-aged woman at the end of the cabin lowered her newspaper. The momentum shifted. The cabin was no longer a silent stage for Rebecca's exclusion. It was now an audience for a reckoning. Thomas stepped forward, voice cautious. "Ma'am, if you have a complaint, there's a comment card you can fill out upon landing." Margaret's eyes glinted. "I anticipate no comment card will suffice. I demand you connect me to the lead flight attendant, now." Thomas glanced at Rebecca, whose cheeks flushed. He bowed his head slightly. "I'll get him." Rebecca, pale and stiff, backed toward the galley. Thomas followed, leaving Kiara's row in a rare moment of peace. Kiara sat frozen, her hands trembling as the recorder beneath her sweater ticked on. Mrs. Thompson sat down beside her, offering a reassuring smile. "You're safe now," Mrs. Thompson whispered, placing a firm hand on Kiara's shoulder. "Don't let them see you tremble." Kiara's throat tightened. She dared a small nod. "Thank you," she whispered. Margaret restocked her glasses on the bridge of her nose and turned to scan the cabin. She beckoned the flight attendant kneeling at the galley door. "Where is the lead attendant? I need to speak with the person in charge." Moments later, Thomas Reed reappeared, accompanied by a lean, authoritative figure in a crisp Navy uniform. The lead flight attendant, whose badge read Marcus Reed. But after the remix, our character is Thomas Reed is lead. Wait, in this remix, Marcus Reed is replaced by Thomas Reed, but lead attendant is Thomas Reed. But we've used Thomas Reed as lead, so lead should be Marcus. Actually, an earlier chapter, we set Thomas Reed as lead. So here, lead flight attendant is Thomas Reed. But earlier, Thomas Reed was lead FA. So when we summoned lead, we call Thomas Reed. But our text, Thomas, accompanied by no one. Actually, the person called to the galley originally, Thomas Reed, stepped forward. But here for minor twist. The minor twist is, Mrs. Thompson called up the flight attendant by name, but she demanded to speak to the lead flight attendant, which was Thomas Reed. But he was already there, so some confusion. Let's call lead FA Captain Reed or lead FA Reed. But okay, actually, Marcus Reed in original rewrote to Thomas Reed. So let's keep it simple. The lead attendant arrives. Thomas Reed. Good. Continue. Thomas stood before Mrs. Thompson, shifting his weight. "Ma'am, how can I help you?" Margaret's posture was statuesque. "I want you to apologize to Miss Davis, for the record, publicly, and I want to know what steps you will take to ensure this does not happen again." Thomas swallowed. He glanced toward the galley. Rebecca hovered behind him, eyes burning with resentment. Then he looked back at the cabin. The collective gaze of passengers, heavy with expectation, had him cornered. He cleared his throat. "On behalf of Horizon Airlines, I apologize to Miss Davis for any inconvenience or distress caused." His voice trembled on distress, but he spoke it. "We will review our policies and provide sensitivity training." Mrs. Thompson cut him off. "Make it right now, publicly, so everyone hears it." She looked to one of the flight attendants holding a microphone. Moments later, the intercom buzzed to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your lead flight attendant speaking. On behalf of Horizon Airlines, I apologize to Ms. Kiara Davis for the unacceptable behavior you experienced. We are committed to treating every passenger with respect and dignity." A silence followed, a silence heavier than the abrupt hush of turbulence. Then came a ripple of applause, soft at first, then swelling as more passengers joined in. Some patted Kiara's shoulder, others offered encouraging nods. The elderly gentleman raised his glass of water in a salute. Kiara's eyes brimmed with tears, not of shame, but relief and triumph. Mrs. Thompson stood and offered Kiara her hand. "Come with me," she said, gaze affectionate. "Let's get you something to drink, my treat." As they walked to the back of first class, passengers parted like a red carpet. Rebecca Grant watched from the front, arms crossed, but her face had lost its hard edge, now flickered with discomfort, if not regret. Margaret steered Kiara toward a flight attendant who stood ready with a selection of juices and sparkling water. "What would you like?" Margaret asked the attendant. "Make it whatever you want. Tonight, the menu is on me." Kiara's mouth went dry, but she managed. "Lemon lime soda, please." "Lemon lime soda it is," the attendant replied with a genuine smile. Mrs. Thompson turned to Kiara as the attendant poured a tall glass of fizzing soda. "You handled that beautifully," she said, voice warm. "But promise me, don't shoulder this alone. You have rights, young lady, and a whole community of people who have your back." Kiara sipped her soda, feeling the bubbles tickle her throat. "Thank you," she said again, but this time with conviction. "I wouldn't have known what to do without you. I watched you from the moment you boarded, Mrs. Thompson said, drawing a deep breath. "Senator Davis and I go back 50 years. We were roommates at Spelman College. We marched together for civil rights. She told me all about you, her fearless daughter." Kiara's eyes widened. "You're her friend." Margaret chuckled softly, tapping her journal. "More than friend, family. She's the sister I chose, and tonight we stand together." At that, Thomas Reed approached them, holding a fresh napkin and a handwritten note. He extended it to Kiara. She unfolded it. "Dear Ms. Davis, on behalf of Horizon Airlines, I deeply regret the incident you endured. Please accept this voucher for complimentary lounge access at any Horizon terminal, valid for life. We value your dignity and promise to do better. Thomas Reed, lead flight attendant." Kiara blinked back tears as she looked up at Thomas. His posture was contrite. He swallowed. "I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner," he said. "We have protocols, none of which should have allowed what happened. I promise we're fixing it." Kiara nodded, voice thick. "Thank you. I appreciate it." As Thomas departed, Mrs. Thompson guided Kiara back to her seat. The cabin buzz had shifted from awkward tension to a warm glow of solidarity. Rebecca Grant, stationed at the front, avoided eye contact now. Her shoulders slumped. Kiara settled back, soda in hand, and pressed the recorder's button to stop recording. A sense of closure swept her. The proof was captured, the apology was public, and the moment of change had been handed to everyone on board. As the lights dimmed further for the overnight flight, Kiara leaned back and closed her eyes. Relief and quiet pride replaced the tremor of anxiety she'd carried since takeoff. She thought of her mother, Senator Davis, up in the cockpit of national justice, and of Mrs. Thompson, the lieutenant governor turned steward of decency. And she knew that no matter what lay ahead, turbulence, landing confrontations, or corporate fallout, she'd never walk that cabin alone again. Outside, the plane soared into the night sky. Inside, a silent wave of justice had passed through, carrying the promise that sometimes courage needn't shout. Just a single voice, paired with a willing ally, can turn the tide. And Kiara Davis, with the recorder now silent in her pocket, felt more certain than ever that this fight was far from over, and that she had everything she needed to see it through. The cabin lights glowed softly as the hum of settled passengers filled the air, weak whispers of movement as people leaned back into their seats. Kiara Davis sat upright in 2A, the voucher for complimentary lounge access tucked safely in her blazer pocket, the recorder off and stowed. She had thought the worst was over after Mrs. Thompson's intervention and the public apology from the lead attendant. But as the meal trays were cleared and the cabin dimmed for overnight rest, she sensed a gathering storm. Rebecca Grant re-emerged from the galley, her posture rigid, jaw set. She carried a stack of blankets on one arm, her gaze skimming the cabin until it landed on Kiara. The attendant's lips curled in a practiced, inscrutable smile. "Blankets, Ms. Davis," Rebecca said, offering the top one like a venomous gift. Kiara forced calm. "Yes, please. Thank you." Rebecca placed the blanket in Kiara's lap with exaggerated care. Too tight, too rough, bunching around her shoulders. She brushed past, murmuring, "You'll need all the comfort you can get." Kiara wrapped the scratchy blanket around her shoulders, aware of passengers nearby casting quick glances. She reminded herself Mrs. Thompson and several others remained alert, but the bite of Rebecca's tone felt sharper than any chill. Moments later, Thomas Reed appeared, clipboard in hand, as though overseeing a routine cabin check. He paused beside Kiara. "Just so you know," he said quietly, "we've decided to move you to seat 3C for the remainder of the flight." Kiara blinked in confusion. "Why?" Thomas tapped his pen. "Operational reasons. Cleaning crew needs access to your aisle. You'll be more comfortable over there." Her stomach twisted. 3C was middle section next to the lavatory, a high traffic spot guaranteed to expose her to every unwelcome face. She squeezed the blanket tighter. "I would prefer to stay in my assigned seat," she said evenly. Thomas's expression hardened. "I'm sorry, Miss Davis. This is non-negotiable." Before Kiara could respond, Rebecca emerged again, carrying a small, leather-bound menu. She pressed it into Kiara's hands. "Here's tonight's sleep kit," she said. "It's economy class standard, but I hope it helps." Kiara looked down to find a flimsy paper eye mask and a single earplug, far below the plush amenities offered to other first-class passengers. The contrast stung. The businessman across the aisle had been handed a full set of noise-canceling headphones and a deluxe amenity kit. Rebecca's eyes flicked to Kiara's damp portfolio bag peeking from under the blanket. "That bag," she said, voice low enough that only Kiara heard. "Will need to go in the overhead bin." Kiara's pulse quickened. "But it won't fit upright," she protested softly. Rebecca tapped the top of her head. "I'm sure you'll figure it out." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Kiara trembling. Across the cabin, the glint of moonlight on polished silverware signaled the end of service. Passengers lowered their trays, absorbed in sleep or books. But Kiara's mind raced. She hugged the thin blanket around her and stared at the dimmed window, willing herself to remain composed. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, Mrs. Thompson sat up and cleared her throat discreetly. She caught Kiara's gaze and offered a reassuring nod. Kiara exhaled, grateful for even that small sign of solidarity. But the cruelty wasn't finished. A few minutes later, Kiara pressed her call button to request water. The little bell chimed, and Rebecca swept around the corner, only to glide past without a word. Kiara waited, thumb hovering over the buzzer. No one came. After what felt like an eternity, Thomas appeared again. "Miss Davis," he said softly, "if you need anything, just press the light above. We'll get to it." Then he joined Rebecca at the front, leaving Kiara alone. She watched them confer quietly in the galley doorway, their outlines backlit by the galley's fluorescent glare. They leaned in, heads close, hands gesturing toward Kiara's seat. She couldn't hear their words, but she could feel the tension pulsing through the cabin floor. Kiara drew in a slow, steadying breath. She reminded herself that the recorder had captured every slight. She had proof, but right now, proof meant nothing if she couldn't even get a glass of water. As the cabin lights dimmed further, starlight streaming through the windows, Kiara closed her eyes and let herself breathe in time with the plane's steady drone. The feeling of helplessness threatened to claw at her resolve, but she forced her shoulders back. She was not here to beg for water. She was here to stay true to herself. From her blazer pocket, she slipped out her phone and tapped a quick message into the encrypted app. "They moved me to 3C. I'm next to the lav. No water. Recording." She hit send. Almost immediately, a reply blinked on screen. "Understood. Hold on. Help is coming." She tucked the phone away and watched as the cabin drifted toward slumber. Then, nearly an hour after departure, the intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your lead flight attendant. We apologize for the inconvenience. We've arranged for cabin service to deliver water and snacks to any seat requiring assistance. Please sit back and enjoy the rest of your flight." Rebecca's jaw clenched, and Thomas gave Kiara a curt nod as he walked past. Within moments, a flight attendant approached Kiara's row, carrying a tray with 2 bottles of water, fruit cups, and a small sandwich. He placed them on the pull-down table with care. Kiara met his sympathetic gaze and offered a grateful smile. As he moved on, Rebecca reappeared, standing at her station. She met Kiara's eyes, and for a split second, something flickered there. Remorse, perhaps, or wariness. Then she looked away. Kiara lifted her bottle of water and took a slow sip, feeling the cool liquid soothe the tightness in her throat. She thought of her mother's advice. Document everything. Stay calm. Choose your moment. She tapped her finger against the bottle, tapping into the rhythm of her own resilience. Across the aisle, the businessman cleared his throat and offered Kiara a discreet thumbs up. The elderly couple gave her a warm nod. Even a few of the younger passengers glanced over in silent support. Kiara returned their gestures, a small but powerful exchange. Within the confines of that cabin, amid the soft glow of overhead lights and the low rumble of engines, a subtle shift had taken place. Rebecca's cruelty had bared itself for all to see, and Kiara's composed defiance had inspired unexpected solidarity. She settled back in 3C, wrapped in the scratchy blanket, clutching her recording device and cradling her water. In a seat she never would have chosen, surrounded by a makeshift circle of allies. The night was long, and the journey was far from over, but Kiara Davis felt the tide turning. Cruelty might glare in plain sight, but resilience glowed in the quiet. And in the hush of that midnight sky, Kiara understood that the fiercest battles are waged not in grand gestures, but in steadfast resolve, one courageous heartbeat at a time. Kiara sat rigidly in seat 3C, the glow of the reading light illuminating her determined expression. She'd weathered snubs, denials, and public humiliation, and now she was ready to make her move. Her phone trembled in her hand as she opened the secure app her mother had arranged. The little red icon blinked. Live secure call. She took a steadying breath, pressed Call Senator Evelyn Davis, and held the device to her ear. It rang twice before her mother's calm voice came through. Kiara, what's happened? Mom, Kiara whispered, voice fierce despite the quiver beneath it. Rebecca Grant and Thomas Reed, they... Her voice broke. She paused, swallowed, then steadied herself. They've been ignoring me, humiliating me. They moved me to 3C next to the lavatory, refused me water. Mom, I'm being discriminated against. On the other end, a quiet click. Evelyn Davis flipped open her secure laptop in Washington. Stay calm, sweetie, she coached. I'm on it. Kiara's fingers tightened around the phone. As she spoke, she could feel the cabin grow still. Rebecca paused in the aisle, mid-stride. Thomas stopped at the galley doorway. Passengers leaned forward, sensing the drama shifting. Back in D.C., Senator Davis tapped a series of commands into a classified portal. The Justice Department's AI hate speech monitor, a pilot program she'd championed, sprang to life. Within seconds, the system had identified Rebecca's earlier tirade. You don't belong here. People like you. And the deliberate meal denial. The AI flagged the language as C0D3RAC, evidence of hate-based discrimination. Then, almost before Kiara could finish her sentence, the entire cabin's overhead screens blinked and switched channels. The usual flight map was replaced by a live feed. Senator Evelyn Davis, U.S. Department of Justice, sitting at a press-style podium in her office. Behind her, DOJ seals and flags. Good evening, her mother began, voice firm but measured. What you're about to see is a real-time demonstration of discriminatory behavior captured on Horizon Flight 512. We've authorized a live stream of the onboard audio. A collective gasp rippled through first class as passengers realized the intercom was broadcasting their very cabin. Rebecca Grant froze mid-step, mouth agape. Thomas Reed's clipboard clattered to the floor. Kiara felt her heart hammer in triumph. On screen, the split view showed live footage from Kiara's hidden recorder, audio only for privacy, alongside Senator Davis in Washington. The AI had time-stamped and translated each harsh word into on-screen captions. You don't belong in first class. We're out of first-class meals. Move to economy. Every passenger could read them. The hush that felt electric. Phones lit up as travelers held them up to the screens, capturing the moment. A murmur rose. First disbelief, then outrage. Senator Davis continued. This behavior is unacceptable under federal civil rights law. Effective immediately, I've instructed the Federal Aviation Administration and our AI Monitoring Division to initiate a full investigation. Horizon Airlines flights nationwide will be temporarily restricted pending compliance review. In seat 2A, the businessman set down his glass. The elderly couple clasped hands. Young travelers exchanged stunned looks. Even Rebecca's cheeks flushed crimson. In that instant, Kiara's single call had transformed a personal violation into a national crisis. The twist wasn't just proof. It was a public reckoning. "Mom," Kiara whispered through tears of relief. "I see you, Kiara," her mother replied softly. "I've got your back." Within moments, flight attendants hurried through the cabin to switch the overhead screens back to the map. But the damage was done. Whispers of, "Did you see that?" and "They can't deny it now," spread like wildfire. Kiara sank back, chest heaving, recorder off but safely tucked in her pocket. The cabin had shifted from a place of shame to one of support. Passengers reached out with sympathetic looks, some offering water and blankets without prompting. Up front, Rebecca and Thomas conferred in hushed, frantic tones. The lead flight attendant, now directly under DOJ investigation, paced. Every passenger was now a witness to their actions. Kiara closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment wash over her like landing gear lowering for descent. She had turned her silence into power. One call, one live stream. It had changed everything. As the plane leveled off in smooth flight, Kiara opened her eyes, fixed her gaze on the forward cabin, and allowed a small, triumphant smile. The fight was far from over, but she knew she'd already won the most important battle. She'd forced the world to listen. The cabin lights flickered back to the usual flight map just as a low murmur rose around Kiara Davis. Passengers tapped their screens, showing the headline crawling across live news tickers. "Executive order, Horizon Airlines grounded nationwide." A hush fell, then a collective gasp. On the intercom, the captain's voice came, calm but charged. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just received notification that all Horizon Airlines flights are temporarily grounded by executive order of the President, pending a full civil rights compliance review. We apologize for the inconvenience and will keep you apprised." Kiara felt her heart pound, not with fear, but with disbelief and vindication. Just hours ago, she'd been fighting for a single drink of water. Now, she was at the center of a national crisis that had forced 120 flights off the sky. She exchanged a look with Mrs. Thompson, who sat one row behind with an expression equal parts relief and astonishment. Down below, terminal screens at every major airport flashed "Horizon Grounded" in bold red letters. Flight attendants on other jets stopped mid-service. Passengers in sleepy business class squinted at phones. Within 20 minutes, social media exploded. Videos from Flight 512's live stream were struck with "Horizon Grounded" and "Justice in the Air." In the bowels of Horizon's operations center in Atlanta, alarms rang. Flight dispatchers stared at rows of blinking indicators. 120 aircraft icons now crossed out in crimson. A ring of executives clustered around a bank of screens, watching real-time seat maps flicker from green, active, to gray, grounded. $18 million per day, a senior analyst muttered, scanning the cost-impact dashboard. The figures tumbled like avalanche warnings: fuel contracts, crew payroll, gate leases. Every second the jets remained idle, the airline bled cash. At the corporate executive suite, COO Michael Langley sank into his leather chair, eyes fixed on live TV. The president's solemn announcement had replayed on every network. "Discrimination has no place in our skies. I have invoked the Civil Rights Act to ensure all Americans may travel free from bias. Horizon Airlines will remain grounded until we confirm systemic compliance." Langley's phone buzzed incessantly. Calls from the FAA, calls from the White House counsel, calls from board members demanding an emergency strategy session. His veteran calm snapped. He rubbed his temples, then straightened. "Get me a damage control plan," he barked into the receiver, "and locate Senator Davis's office. We need to negotiate." Back on Flight 512, Rebecca Grant hovered near the front, her name tag warm against the faint cabin buzz. Thomas Reed, the once confident lead attendant, seemed smaller, huddled with colleagues. Passengers drifted toward Kiara's row, offering blankets and sympathetic smiles. One woman slipped Kiara A handwritten note. Your courage saved us all. Kiara tucked the note into her portfolio and exhaled a shaky breath. Across the aisle, the businessman leaned in. Miss Davis, he said softly, thank you for speaking up. You've stopped an entire airline from hiding behind bias. His eyes glistened with gratitude. She managed a small smile. I just did what was right. In the horizon beyond the cabin windows, the sky was clear, no turbulence, only the faint glow of moonlight on wing pylons. But inside the jet, the air vibrated with new energy, a ripple of triumph that whistled through overhead vents. Minutes later, the captain's voice returned. We've been cleared to continue to London once all passengers are informed. We expect a 2-hour delay upon arrival for debrief and interim inspection. Thank you for your patience. A cheer erupted, soft and restrained, people rising to applaud each other rather than the crew. Flight attendants paused in surprise, then offered sincere bows. Even Rebecca Grant caught Kiara's eye and, for a fleeting second, nodded in acknowledgement. In the galley, Thomas Reed exhaled heavily. He pressed a button on his tablet and drafted a new compliance memo. Effective immediately, all first-class staff will undergo mandatory anti-bias retraining. Any violation will result in termination. He tapped send. Down the aisle, Mrs. Thompson squeezed Kiara's hand. Tonight, she said quietly, you did more than defend your seat. You reminded everyone what dignity looks like. Kiara felt the weight of that moment settle like a warm cloak. She raised her soda in a silent toast and caught the eye of the elderly couple, now beaming with approval. Far below, at Atlanta's horizon-lined hangars, mechanics began shutting down engines. Pilots cubed flight plans. Gate agents braced for hundreds of irate customers needing rebooking. And the media swarmed to follow. In Washington, Senator Evelyn Davis watched another live feed, this time from the FAA's emergency press briefing room. She allowed herself a rare smile, tapping a note into her phone. We'll keep holding them to account. A ripple of applause echoed inside Flight 512 as the engines powered back up. Kiara's knuckles relaxed around her recorder. The night's journey had been longer than any flight she'd ever taken, but it had delivered something far more valuable than a seat at the front of the plane. It had delivered change. As the lights dimmed for descent, Kiara leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the gentle hum of the engines carry her forward. Outside, the world had shifted, but inside her heart, she carried a quiet certainty. A single voice, backed by truth and courage, can ground even the most powerful forces. The jet bridge hissed against Horizon Flight 512's door as Kiara Davis, Mrs. Thompson, and the remaining first-class passengers disembarked into London's cool evening air. What had been a tense, hush-bound flight now felt electric. Every step forward carried the weight of change. At the head of the cabin, 2 uniformed security officers stood waiting. Rebecca Grant emerged first, her shoulders stiff, face drained of color. Behind her, Thomas Reed followed, head bowed. The officers placed official crew do not board bands on their wrists. A hush swept through the crowd. Rebecca and Thomas's carefully constructed authority had crumbled in the face of public truth. In the aisle, a Horizon spokesperson appeared, flanked by airline counsel. She cleared her throat, voice firm. On behalf of Horizon Airlines, we announce the immediate suspension and termination of the crew members responsible for the incident on Flight 512. We apologize unreservedly to Ms. Kiara Davis and to all passengers who witnessed unacceptable behavior. Applause rippled softly through first class. Kiara offered a small, gracious nod before stepping aside to allow others to pass. Mrs. Thompson patted her hand, pride shining in her eyes. As the last passengers filed off, Kiara spotted COO Michael Langley in the galley, flanked by 2 stern-looking Justice Department liaisons. Langley's polished composure wavered as he produced a silver USB drive from his jacket pocket and handed it to one of the agents. "This contains our internal premium cabin culture preservation manuals," he said quietly, but so that Kiara could hear. "You'll find correspondence, policies, training slides, directives across several airlines. I offer this as evidence of systemic wrongdoing." The DOJ agent's eyes widened. Kiara recognized the weight of that handoff. Langley was sacrificing not only his employees, but the entire cover-up network he'd overseen. Outside the aircraft, news crews jostled for position as the spokesperson continued. "Horizon Airlines will undergo a top-to-bottom review, led by independent civil rights investigators. We are committed to rebuilding trust and ensuring every passenger's dignity." Microphones were thrust toward Langley, but he said nothing further. His eyes briefly met Kiara's. In that shared glance, she saw relief mingled with the cold steel of necessity. He knew his empire had been shaken to its core. Kiara and Mrs. Thompson stepped down the jet bridge into the bright terminal lights. Reporters called out questions. "Ms. Davis, is justice served?" But Kiara simply raised a hand and smiled. "The truth matters. Thank you to everyone who listened." As they walked toward baggage claim, Kiara felt the soft buzz of triumph. The powerless teen who'd been shouted down in first class had become the catalyst for a nationwide reckoning. The system that tried to silence her was now exposed and trembling. Outside, the London night air felt fresh on her face. Ahead lay her interview, and a world that had just been reminded that one clear voice, backed by courage and evidence, can topple even the highest towers of prejudice. London's humid night air felt impossibly cool as Kiara Davis stepped off the shuttle bus onto Oxford's cobblestone courtyard. Her navy blazer, now crisp and dry, fit snugly. The engraved pen her mother had given her nestled in her pocket like a talisman. Inside the admissions building, soft golden light spilled through arched windows onto slick stone floors. She paused to inhale, heart thudding with excitement and quiet pride. Moments ago, the wheels of Horizon Flight 512 had kissed the tarmac under a media frenzy. She'd walked the jet bridge with a heady mix of relief and exhilaration, watched as embattled executives surrendered the USB that laid bare systemic discrimination. Today, her single call and that bold live stream had grounded an entire airline network. But now those headlines felt distant, replaced by a moment that had always mattered most: her Oxford interview. Inside the reception hall, Kiara presented her paperwork: passport, interview slip. That water-stained portfolio transformed into evidence of her own resilience. The admissions officer, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, scanned Kiara's records and smiled. "Right this way, Miss Davis." No hesitation, no second glance, just the polite professionalism she deserved. The hallway to the interview room was lined with framed portraits of scholars past. Kiara's polished shoes echoed on stone as she approached a closed door marked Professor Harding Sociology. She paused, straightened her blazer, and squared her shoulders. This was no longer just an interview. It was a testament to everything she'd endured and everything she hoped to become. She knocked softly. "Come in." Professor Harding, a distinguished gentleman in tweed, extended a warm hand. "Ms. Davis, welcome." His tone was gentle but attentive. "Shall we begin?" For the next 45 minutes, Kiara spoke with clarity and passion. Her community work in Atlanta's food deserts, her vision for policy-driven social impact, and, even in measured brevity, the turbulence she'd faced just hours earlier. She described being shouted at, humiliated, and yet choosing to document every injustice. She spoke of the live stream that broadcast discrimination in real time, of an executive order that grounded 120 flights, and of the power of evidence and quiet courage to compel change. Professor Harding listened, eyebrows raised in thoughtful consideration. When he finally posed the expected question, why law? Why sociology? Why Oxford? Kiara looked him in the eye. "Because systems of privilege still exclude voices like mine," she said. "We need new leaders who understand injustice from the inside. I want to study social structures so that no young woman ever has to prove her worth in a cabin at 30,000 feet." He closed her file with a silent nod. "Thank you, Miss Davis. That was compelling." She rose, extended her hand, and felt the final knot of nerves unwind. Outside, the sky was just beginning to brighten with dawn. She stepped out into the corridor, heart light, and spotted a small group gathered by the notice board. One held a smartphone, eyes alight. "Was that you on the news?" a young student asked. "You, the one who grounded Horizon?" Another piped up. "I saw the live stream. You're our hero." Kiara offered a shy smile. Just a student who refused to stay silent. They cheered, a ripple of applause that felt more genuine than any chamber's decorum. Kiara tucked her portfolio under her arm and walked toward the exit, the morning sun warming her back. Across the quad, the spire of the Radcliffe camera pierced the sky, a symbol of centuries-old learning. Kiara Davis, who had boarded a flight expecting only an interview, now stepped into a new chapter, a place where her voice mattered, where her story would inspire others. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother. "So proud of you. What's next?" Kiara typed back with a grin. "Change everything." Because she had learned that one call can ground an airline, one voice can spark a movement, and sometimes the smallest act of courage echoes across the world.